Picture this: a man so powerful, so resolute, that his name became synonymous with Russia itself. A Tsar who believed in absolute control, in suppressing revolution, in maintaining a fractured peace through an unyielding will. His reign was marked by strength, military conquest, and the refusal to bow to the winds of change. But what if I told you that this same unyielding power was the very thing that brought about his downfall? What if the iron fist that ruled over millions, quashed revolts, and created a legacy of order was ultimately the cause of the empire's demise? Nicholas I's reign over Russia was one of paradoxes. He was revered as a protector, a man who saved his empire from the chaos of revolution. But beneath that exterior of strength and control, there was something far more fragile, an empire on the brink of collapse. History remembers him as a Tsar who fought to maintain autocratic rule, yet in his battle to preserve it, he unwittingly pushed Russia toward the revolution that would tear it apart. How does a man, so dedicated to his country and his throne, end up being the architect of its ruin? Imagine ruling over an empire stretching from Europe to Asia, an empire whose influence was as vast as it was powerful. Now, imagine standing at the helm, gripping the wheel with a fierce determination, unwilling to change course, even as storms of dissent began to gather on the horizon. Nicholas I was the Tsar who thought his way was the only way, and his empire, one built on power, loyalty, and military conquest, was the unmovable symbol of his authority. Yet, behind the walls of his court, behind the military triumphs and the policies of control, there was an underlying truth that he failed to see. The winds of change were coming, and they would not be stopped by an iron fist. But how could this have happened? How could a Tsar who was so certain of his power and so resolute in his belief that Russia's future depended on autocracy have been so blind to the revolution bubbling under the surface? The answer lies in the very nature of autocracy itself. The more Nicholas clung to absolute control, the more he alienated the very people he sought to protect. His refusal to listen, to adapt, to evolve alongside the changing tides of history created a pressure cooker that was destined to explode. This is not just the story of a ruler, it is the story of an empire that failed to adapt to the modern world, an empire whose very foundation was eroded by the rigidity of its leadership. I thought he was strengthening his empire, but in reality, he was digging its grave. His reign, steeped in pride, power, and a relentless pursuit of stability, would ultimately give rise to the seeds of revolution that would forever alter the course of Russian history. The Tsar who sought to protect his country with an iron grip unknowingly set in motion the forces that would tear it apart. The tragic tale of Nicholas I isn't just about the fall of an empire. It's about the dangers of stubbornness and rigidity in the face of inevitable change. It's about the cost of ignoring the voices of dissent, of closing one's ears to the cries for reform, of believing that power can be maintained solely through force. Nicholas I's story is a warning, a lesson in the fragility of absolute power. It's a story about how the pursuit of control can lead to the very destruction of what it seeks to protect. But before we delve deeper into the tragic rise and fall of Nicholas I, take a moment to think about this. What if his reign could have been different? What if he had listened? What if he had embraced change, or at least recognized it? Would the Russian Empire still be standing today, or would it have fallen much sooner? This story holds more than just historical facts. It holds lessons that resonate with us today. It's a tale of power, pride, and the inescapable march of time. And it's a story you don't want to miss. If this tale intrigues you, if the story of Nicholas I's reign and its consequences are something you want to learn more about, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. By subscribing, you're supporting our mission to bring you more captivating stories like this, stories that uncover the untold truths of history and the lessons that continue to shape our world. Let's dive into the complexities of Nicholas I's reign and uncover the true cost of his autocratic vision. Stay with us as we unravel the layers of his reign, the triumphs and the failures, and the empire that he sought to preserve at all costs. The true story of Nicholas I is just beginning. Nicholas I's reign was an era that seemed both monumental and tragic, woven with contradictions that continue to reverberate throughout history. As Tsar, Nicholas I fought tirelessly to maintain Russia's autocratic rule, using his immense power to suppress revolutions, dissent, and any signs of instability within the empire. His iron will held Russia together, at least on the surface, as he steered the empire with a firm hand through various challenges, wars, uprisings, and political strife. But in doing so, he unknowingly sowed the seeds of the empire's eventual downfall. What is it about power and our belief in its invincibility that blinds us to the truth? NicholasI's story offers a profound lesson in the consequences of absolute control. At the heart of Nicholas I's reign was his belief in the invulnerability of autocracy. In an age where revolutions were sweeping across Europe and the winds of change seemed unstoppable, Nicholas thought that the key to Russia's survival lay in absolute rule. He viewed himself as a protector, not just of the state, but of its very identity, an identity bound by the strength of the Tsar, the Russian Orthodox Church, and the legacy of the Romanov dynasty. His determination to maintain order, to preserve the status quo, led him to systematically eliminate any forces he deemed dangerous to that order, whether through military action or political suppression. And yet, despite all the military victories and the apparent peace he secured through these methods, Nicholas I was unaware that he was holding onto a fragile facade. There is something deeply human about the way Nicholas I's story unfolds. Here was a man who loved his country so much that he clung to it with an iron grip, refusing to let go, convinced that he alone knew what was best. But there is a tragedy in that kind of devotion, a tragedy that stems from a refusal to recognize when change is not only inevitable but necessary. Nicholas I had every intention of preserving Russia, but his refusal to bend, to listen, to evolve with the world around him, left him blind to the needs of his people. In this, there's a profound lesson about leadership and power. True strength lies not in holding on tightly, but in knowing when to loosen your grip, when to listen, and when to change course. As history has shown time and again, the more autocrats resist change, the more they pave the way for the very forces they seek to control. Nicholas I's decision to quash the Polish uprising of 1830 with brute military force, for example, was not just about preserving order in one small region, it was about a deeper fear of losing control. The revolt in Poland represented something far more significant than a nationalist movement. It was a manifestation of the longing for freedom, the desire for self-determination, and the yearning for a voice that was silenced by the iron fist of the Tsar. When Nicholas crushed this uprising with over 100,000 troops, he thought he had preserved his empire, but what he didn't realize was that his actions fueled the very fire he sought to extinguish. Instead of extinguishing rebellion, he stoked it. Nicholas I's inability to see the long-term consequences of his methods, his reliance on force and suppression, set the stage for the very revolution he feared. The lessons here are so clear, they should echo in the minds of every leader. When you try to stifle the voices of your people, when you crush their hopes and dreams in favor of your own vision of order, you are only sowing the seeds of discontent. The more you suppress the individual spirit, the greater the need for that spirit to break free. It is an inevitable law of human nature. This is where Nicholas I's downfall became inevitable. His empire, built on the iron fist of autocracy, was fragile because it lacked the foundation of genuine trust between the ruler and the ruled. When a leader refuses to adapt, to listen to the needs of the people, to give them the freedom they crave, the cracks begin to appear. Nicholas believed his empire was built on his strength alone, but in reality, it was only held together by the fragile threads of fear and submission. And when those threads began to fray, as they inevitably do, the empire began to unravel. But here lies the tragedy of autocracy at its core. It denies the very people it seeks to protect the right to shape their own destiny. Autocratic rule may bring short-term stability, but it is only a temporary fix. It cannot address the root causes of unrest, the desires, the aspirations, and the growing demand for change that will eventually overwhelm the old order. The deeper lesson here is that a ruler's greatest strength is not in their ability to dominate, but in their capacity to recognize when it is time to empower others, to trust their people, and to allow the winds of change to flow freely. Had Nicholas I been more willing to adapt, to listen to the voices of those around him, his reign might have been marked by a different kind of legacy, one of growth, reform, and enduring stability. His tragic flaw was not in his loyalty to his country, but in his belief that power could be maintained solely through force. There was no room for compromise in his vision, no space for dialogue, and that is where his story diverges from that of truly great leaders. The best leaders are those who understand the value of change and the importance of compromise. They know when to stand firm, but they also know when to yield. They are not afraid to listen, to change their minds, and to evolve. The events of Nicholas I's reign are a reminder that the pursuit of power for its own sake is hollow. It is not the power to control others that makes a leader great. It is the power to inspire, to elevate, and to empower the people they serve. In history, those who have left lasting legacies are not the ones who clung to power with an iron grip, but those who understood that true power is shared, not hoarded. As we reflect on Nicholas I's reign, it is important to remember that history is not just a record of events. It is a mirror reflecting the lessons of the past. And in these lessons, we find both warnings and opportunities for growth. For those of us living in the present, we can learn from the mistakes of the past. We can choose to be the kind of leaders who listen, who evolve, and who empower others, rather than the kind who seek to control and suppress. Nicholas I's story is ultimately one of loss, not just the loss of an empire, but the loss of the opportunity to build something greater than himself. He failed to understand that power is not a possession, it is a responsibility, and the responsibility of leadership is to create a legacy that empowers others to carry the torch long after you're gone. In the end, it is not the iron fist that ensures survival, it is the hand that is open, ready to help, to guide, and to shape the future. So, as we journey further into the life of Nicholas I and the empire he left behind, let us carry with us the understanding that leadership is not about holding tight to power, it is about knowing when to let go, when to listen, and when to act with the wisdom that comes from understanding the true needs of the people. This is the lesson that resonates beyond the pages of history. It is a lesson that we can all apply, today and in the future, in our own lives and leadership roles. And it is this timeless truth that we must carry forward from the story of Nicholas I. Nicholas I ruled over a vast empire, stretching from Europe to Asia, and his reign was defined by his absolute belief in the power of autocracy. It was a time of imperial strength and military prowess, but beneath the surface, there were cracks forming in the very foundations of Russia. His reign, which began in 1825, was one of contrasts marked by military conquests, political repression, and an iron fist aimed at maintaining a fractured peace. He inherited the throne after the death of his brother, Tsar Alexander I, and from the moment he took power, he set his sights on preserving Russian autocracy at any cost. Yet, in his attempt to maintain this absolute rule, Nicholas I unwittingly sowed the seeds of the empire's demise. For all his iron will and determination, Nicholas I failed to recognize a fundamental truth. Autocracy, when left unchecked, is a fragile system. It rests not on the strength of the Tsar alone, but on the willingness of the people to accept that power. This is where Nicholas I's reign reveals a tragic flaw: his refusal to listen, to adapt, to evolve with the changing winds of time. He believed that by suppressing dissent and maintaining tight control over all aspects of Russian life, he could secure the empire's future. But what he failed to see was that the more he clung to absolute control, the more he pushed his people into a corner, creating an atmosphere ripe for rebellion. At the heart of Nicholas I's reign was his obsession with order. He believed that without a strong Tsar at the helm, Russia would fall into chaos. He saw revolutionaries and dissenters as threats to the stability of the empire, and so he acted decisively to eliminate them. His military actions were often swift and brutal, particularly when it came to suppressing uprisings. The most infamous example of this was the Polish uprising of 1830. When Polish military cadets rose up against Russian rule, Nicholas I responded with overwhelming force. His troops crushed the revolt, and he made sure that Poland was thoroughly integrated into the Russian Empire. But while he may have succeeded in quelling this rebellion, his actions came at a cost. He pushed the Polish people further into resentment, and in doing so, he ensured that the fire of rebellion would smoulder for years to come. It's easy to view Nicholas I as a Tsar who protected his empire from the forces of revolution, but the reality is more complicated. His reign was characterized by fear, a fear of change, a fear of losing control, and a fear of what might happen if he didn't maintain his grip on power. His policies were deeply repressive. The secret police, known as the Third Section, were given sweeping powers to arrest, imprison, and even execute those who were seen as enemies of the state. Universities were monitored, political dissent was silenced, and freedom of speech was severely restricted. Nicholas I believed that by stifling the voices of the people, he could keep the empire stable. But what he didn't realize was that the more he suppressed the voices of his people, the louder those voices would become. The more he pushed them down, the more they would find ways to rise up. The irony is that in Nicholas I's attempt to preserve the empire, he set in motion the forces that would eventually tear it apart. The repressive policies, the military conquests, the suppression of free thought, these actions did not lead to stability. Instead, they created an environment of simmering discontent. The more NicholasI sought to maintain control, the more he alienated the very people he sought to protect. And it wasn't just the Polish rebellion. There were countless smaller uprisings, social unrest, and a growing sense of dissatisfaction among the people. One of the most significant factors in the downfall of Nicholas I was his inability to modernize. The world was changing rapidly, and while Europe was embracing new ideas of democracy, equality, and freedom, Russia remained anchored in its autocratic past. Nicholas I's refusal to entertain reforms, his refusal to engage with the changing political landscape of Europe, made him increasingly out of touch with the needs and desires of his people. The 19th century was a time of great political upheaval, and across Europe, monarchies were being replaced by constitutional governments. Revolutions were taking place in France, in Belgium, and throughout Europe, but Nicholas I remained steadfast in his belief that autocracy was the only path to stability. He saw reform as a threat to his rule, and in this, he failed to recognize the inevitable. This unwillingness to reform wasn't just a political mistake, it was a fatal flaw that would define his reign. Nicholas I's refusal to adapt to the changing political and social landscape created a system that was inflexible, one that could not respond to the needs of a society that was becoming increasingly modern. In his zeal to maintain control, he created a government that lacked the capacity for change. He became a ruler who could only see the world through the lens of tradition, and as the world changed around him, he became less and less able to keep up. This failure to modernize, to evolve, would have far-reaching consequences for Russia. It's important to understand that Nicholas I was not an evil man. He genuinely believed that he was doing what was best for his country. His reign was not one of cruelty for cruelty's sake, but one of misguided devotion to what he thought was necessary to preserve the empire. However, this belief in the righteousness of his cause blinded him to the realities of the world around him. His empire was vast, and his influence stretched across Europe and Asia, but his power rested on an illusion that autocracy was the only way forward. And as the years passed, that illusion crumbled, as all illusions do. If there's one lesson we can learn from Nicholas I's reign, it's the importance of flexibility. Autocracy may seem like a strong foundation on which to build an empire, but it is a brittle foundation. The strength of a nation lies not in its ability to suppress dissent, but in its ability to adapt, to listen, and to embrace change. NicholasI believed that by clinging to his vision of autocracy, he could keep Russia intact. But in the end, it was that very refusal to change, to listen to his people, that led to the empire's downfall. The great tragedy of Nicholas I is that, despite his love for his country and his unwavering belief in the necessity of his rule, he ultimately became the architect of his own undoing. He could have been a ruler who modernized Russia, who embraced reform, who listened to his people. But instead, he chose the path of repression, and that path led him straight into the hands of history. His reign stands as a cautionary tale for all those in power, a warning about the dangers of rigid authority, of refusing to listen, and of failing to adapt. As we look back on the reign of Nicholas I, we are reminded of the importance of humility in leadership. A leader's strength lies not in their ability to dominate, but in their ability to inspire, to adapt, and to lead with the wisdom that comes from understanding the needs of the people. The story of Nicholas I is a tragic one, but it is also one that teaches us valuable lessons about the nature of power, authority, and the inevitable march of time. In the end, Nicholas I's reign was a moment in history that passed too quickly, too harshly, and too unyieldingly. The empire he sought to protect, with all its power, military might, and territorial expanses, eventually crumbled under the weight of his own determination to hold it together. His inability to see the changing tides, to evolve with the times, marked the end of an era and the beginning of the Russian Revolution. The lesson here is not just one for rulers, but for all of us, that in the face of change, the greatest strength lies not in stubbornness or resistance, but in the ability to recognize when it's time to evolve. The world will always change. The question is whether we will be ready to adapt with it. Nicholas I's reign was undoubtedly one of conviction, strength, and resolve, but also one deeply marked by an inability to adapt. His desire to uphold Russia's power, influence, and integrity led him to employ methods that ultimately resulted in stagnation, suffocation, and rebellion. Yet, when we reflect upon his rule, it is essential to move beyond just the historical facts and consider the deeper human lessons that can be drawn from his life and leadership. It is easy to criticize Nicholas I for his repressive policies, but we must also acknowledge the sincerity behind his actions. He was not merely a tyrant wielding an iron fist for its own sake. He was a man who truly believed that Russia's survival depended on absolute control. He feared that any deviation from autocratic rule would lead to chaos, that reform would weaken the empire he loved so deeply. However, history shows us that in trying to preserve Russia's strength, he inadvertently weakened it by isolating his people and dismissing the need for change. As human beings, we all encounter moments in our lives where we must decide whether to cling to old ways or embrace change. It's a challenge we all face, the desire for stability, comfort, and certainty versus the pressing need to adapt, evolve, and move forward. NicholasI's reign serves as a poignant reminder of the perils of rigid thinking. His belief in the infallibility of autocracy blinded him to the fact that Russia, just like any society, needed to evolve. Change was inevitable, and resisting it only led to frustration and eventual failure. What Nicholas I's story teaches us, on a personal level, is the importance of balance between conviction and flexibility, power and humility, order and freedom. Life is not about simply holding on to what we have, but about evolving with it. Just like the Russian Empire, we can sometimes find ourselves in a position where the foundation that once served us begins to crack. And it's in those moments that we must be brave enough to listen, to observe, and to make the necessary changes before it's too late. I see Nicholas I as a man who loved his country deeply, but was ultimately trapped by his own belief in control. His actions were driven by a sense of duty and responsibility, but they were also shaped by a fear of the unknown, an unwillingness to embrace the complexities of a changing world. The question then becomes, what would have happened if he had been more open-minded? What if he had engaged in dialogue with his people, listened to their needs, and allowed Russia to evolve gradually? Could the Russian Empire have been preserved for a longer period? Or would it have simply evolved into something greater, more modern, and more resilient? In our own lives, it's easy to become entrenched in our own ways, to dismiss change as a threat, or to ignore the lessons that time offers. But the reality is that growth, whether in leadership or in life, comes from embracing change. It comes from understanding that the world around us is constantly shifting, and so must we. The story of Nicholas I teaches us that the danger of unwavering control is not only in the stifling of progress, but also in the alienation of the very people we are trying to protect. It is a tragedy of human nature that we often fail to realize the importance of dialogue and adaptation until it is too late. In reflecting on Nicholas I's reign, I can't help but think of all the leaders, in both the past and present, who have followed his example of rigid control. But equally, I think of the ones who have learned from his mistakes, the ones who have embraced flexibility, who have understood that true strength lies not in domination, but in the ability to change course when necessary. It's a lesson for all of us, whether it's in the workplace, in relationships, or in how we live our lives. There are moments when we must let go of what we think is right and instead open ourselves to new ideas, new possibilities, and new paths. The tragic irony of Nicholas I's reign is that while he sought to protect the empire, he did so in a way that ultimately led to its unraveling. He set the stage for revolution, not by his strength, but by his inability to recognize the world was changing. And so, this lesson remains, both for those in power and for those of us trying to navigate our own lives. The pursuit of power, when unchecked, can lead to destruction, while the pursuit of wisdom and change can lead to growth and renewal. As we look to the future, may we remember that history is full of those who clung to the past, only to be swept away by time. It is those who adapt, who evolve, and who listen to the changing tides of the world, who stand the best chance of leaving a lasting legacy not of control, but of understanding and progress. The fall of Nicholas I and the empire he sought to preserve are reminders that control, however necessary at times, must always be tempered by the willingness to change. Nicholas I, a man of strong convictions, ruled over an empire that spanned vast territories, from the steppes of Russia to the heart of Europe. His reign is often remembered for its military might, its unyielding pursuit of control, and its strict adherence to autocratic principles. Yet beneath the layers of strength and order, there existed a dangerous undercurrent, a profound instability that would eventually lead to the downfall of the very empire he sought to preserve. His reign, characterized by relentless repression and a refusal to embrace reform, set in motion the forces that would tear the Russian Empire apart. It is a story that holds timeless lessons about leadership, power, and the price of inflexibility. As we look deeper into Nicholas I's rule, it becomes clear that he was a man driven by fear. Fear of change, fear of rebellion, and, above all, fear of losing control. This fear led him to take drastic measures to ensure his grip on power. His policies were aimed at eliminating any form of dissent, and he employed every tool at his disposal, from secret police to military intervention, to quash any sign of rebellion. He believed that by suppressing opposition, he could maintain the stability of the empire. But in reality, this suppression only planted the seeds of discontent. The more NicholasI tried to control the empire, the more he alienated the very people he sought to protect. He created an environment in which people were silenced, their voices stifled, their aspirations suppressed. And in doing so, he inadvertently pushed Russia toward revolution. In his attempts to maintain order, Nicholas I became increasingly out of touch with the world around him. While Europe was undergoing a series of profound political and social changes, Russia remained locked in its autocratic past. Nicholas I was blind to the winds of change sweeping across the continent, and he was unwilling to modernize the Russian political system. His refusal to entertain the idea of reform left the Russian Empire stagnant and vulnerable. He saw any form of change as a threat to his authority, and this fear drove him to reject any attempt to reform the political system or address the growing dissatisfaction among the people. His vision of Russia was one of absolute control, and he believed that any challenge to this vision would lead to chaos. But in his stubbornness, he failed to recognize that the very stability he sought to maintain was crumbling beneath the weight of his resistance to change. Nicholas I's reign was marked by a series of military campaigns, and his military prowess was undeniable. He sought to project strength and to assert Russian dominance on the world stage. But even in his military victories, there was a sense of fragility. He was constantly fighting to protect his empire from internal and external threats, and while he may have won battles, he lost the war for the hearts and minds of his people. The Polish uprising of 1830, for example, was a key moment in his reign. The rebellion was swiftly crushed by Russian forces, but it came at a heavy cost. In quelling the uprising, Nicholas I further alienated the Polish people, and his actions deepened the divisions within the empire. Instead of fostering unity, his approach to governance sowed division and resentment. And as we know, resentment festers, and over time, it gives rise to revolution. The more NicholasI tried to impose his will, the more he alienated the people who had once been loyal to the throne. The repression of dissent became the cornerstone of his rule. The secret police, the third section, were tasked with rooting out any form of political opposition, and anyone suspected of disloyalty was subject to arrest, imprisonment, or even execution. Universities, intellectuals, and political movements were all tightly controlled. Freedom of thought was stifled, and the Russian people were left with little room to express their desires, their grievances, or their hopes for a better future. It is in this context of oppression and fear that the seeds of revolution were sown. Nicholas I's refusal to listen to the voices of his people, his insistence on maintaining an iron grip on power, created a pressure cooker of discontent that would eventually explode. One of the most tragic aspects of Nicholas I's reign is the fact that he genuinely believed he was doing what was best for Russia. He was not a ruler driven by malice or a desire to crush his people. Rather, he was a man who believed that autocracy was the only path to stability. He saw himself as the protector of the empire, the one man who could hold the vast and diverse territories of Russia together. But in his single-minded pursuit of control, he failed to see the broader picture. He failed to recognize that the world was changing, that his people were evolving, and that a new era was on the horizon. He clung to a vision of Russia that no longer fit with the realities of the time, and in doing so, he sealed the fate of the empire. Nicholas I's failure to adapt is a powerful reminder of the dangers of rigid thinking in leadership. As human beings, we all encounter moments in life where we must make a choice. Do we cling to the familiar, the comfortable, and the known? Or do we embrace change, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable? The tragedy of Nicholas I's reign lies in the fact that he chose the former. He was unwilling to confront the fact that autocracy, while once a powerful tool for maintaining control, was no longer sustainable in a rapidly changing world. His refusal to reform and to listen to the voices of the people left Russia vulnerable to revolution. The empire he sought to protect eventually crumbled under the weight of his stubbornness. This lesson, the importance of flexibility in leadership, is one that resonates across time. Whether we're talking about political leadership or personal growth, the ability to adapt is essential. When we refuse to listen to others, when we shut ourselves off from new ideas and perspectives, we risk isolating ourselves. Nicholas I's reign teaches us that even the strongest empires, even the most powerful leaders, cannot survive without the ability to evolve. The more we resist change, the more we push it away, the more it builds up, and the more it will eventually break through. As we reflect on the life and reign of Nicholas I, we are reminded of the fragility of power, power that is based solely on control, on the suppression of dissent, and on an unwillingness to adapt, is power that cannot endure. The true strength of a nation, of a leader, lies not in the ability to dominate, but in the ability to listen, to grow, and to evolve with the times. It lies in the ability to recognize that the world is changing and to embrace that change rather than fight against it. Nicholas I's story is one of both triumph and tragedy. His military successes and his ability to hold the empire together for a time are undeniable, but in the end, his refusal to adapt, to listen, and to embrace reform led to the downfall of the empire he so dearly sought to protect. His reign serves as a powerful lesson for all of us, that true leadership is not about control, but about humility, adaptability, and the willingness to change when change is needed. The story of Nicholas I is a deeply human one, a tale of ambition, fear, and ultimately, the devastating consequences of refusing to evolve. What strikes me as most tragic about Nicholas I's reign is how much he believed in his own righteousness and the purity of his intentions. He genuinely believed that his approach, an unyielding autocracy, was the only way to preserve Russia, to keep it from falling into chaos. But in doing so, he overlooked a key truth, that no empire, no leader, no nation can remain static forever. The world around them changes, society shifts, and without adaptation, even the mightiest structures will crumble. This is not just a lesson about politics, it's a lesson about life. How many of us, in our personal lives, cling to old habits, old ideas, or old ways of thinking because we believe they are the only ways. We fear change. And like Nicholas I, we hold on to what we know, hoping that our firm grasp on the past will keep us safe. But the truth is, just like an empire, our personal lives can only thrive if we allow ourselves to evolve. It is so easy to fall into the trap of believing that the old ways will always work, but time has a way of reminding us that change is inevitable. If we resist it too long, we risk becoming irrelevant, isolated, and ultimately lost. Nicholas I's failure to listen to the cries for reform reminds me of the importance of humility in leadership, whether that leadership is in the context of ruling an empire, leading a company, or even guiding a family. Leaders who cannot listen to others, who do not recognize the necessity of adapting to new ideas or new circumstances, are doomed to face the same fate as Nicholas I. His rejection of reform wasn't just a political failure, it was a personal one, a failure to recognize the changing nature of the world. It's one thing to hold firm to your beliefs, but it's another to be blind to the evolving landscape around you. In his quest to protect Russia, Nicholas I isolated himself from the very people he sought to serve, making them feel unheard, unseen, and unimportant. It is in this disconnect that the seeds of revolution were planted. But what about us in our own lives? Are we, like Nicholas I, pushing away the voices that call for change? Are we so entrenched in our own ideas and beliefs that we cannot hear the opinions, concerns, or desires of others? Whether in relationships, at work, or within our communities, the inability to listen is a dangerous thing. It creates distance, resentment, and ultimately a breakdown of trust. Just as Nicholas I's failure to listen to his people led to the empire's collapse, a failure to listen in our personal lives can lead to broken relationships, lost opportunities, and missed growth. Nicholas I's reign also brings to light the question of control. He thought that by clamping down on dissent, he could ensure the empire's stability, but in the process, he stifled the very energy and innovation that could have strengthened Russia. There is a fine line between control and trust. Too much control creates an atmosphere of fear, and fear is corrosive. It eats away at the very foundation of any relationship, whether it's with a nation or with a friend, a partner, or a child. Trust, on the other hand, is the cornerstone of any thriving relationship. True leadership, whether political or personal, is about creating an environment where others feel heard, valued, and free to express themselves. Nicholas I's reign stands as a cautionary tale of what happens when trust is replaced with fear, and control takes precedence over empathy and understanding. Reflecting on his reign, I also can't help but think about the inevitability of time. Time, in many ways, was the true adversary of Nicholas I. He could not escape the changing tide of history, just as none of us can escape the passage of time. It's easy to think of time as an external force, something we have no control over, but perhaps time is more like a mirror, reflecting back at us the choices we make, the opportunities we miss, and the paths we refuse to take. Nicholas I, for all his military prowess, could not stop time from marching forward. His inability to adapt was not just a failure of policy, but a failure to recognize that time waits for no one. In our own lives, we too must recognize that time is constantly moving forward. The choices we make today shape the future, and if we are not careful, we may find ourselves stuck in the past, unable to move forward. Just as Nicholas I's empire, which was once so mighty, eventually succumbed to revolution, we must ask ourselves, what are we doing today to ensure that we are evolving, adapting, and moving forward? Are we clinging to outdated ideas, to the comfort of the past, or are we embracing change, innovation, and growth? There is a lesson in Nicholas I's failure, one that applies not just to rulers and empires, but to all of us. Power, whether political or personal, is most effective when it is rooted in adaptability, humility, and an openness to change. The strength of a nation or an individual lies not in their ability to control, but in their ability to listen, to learn, and to grow. In the end, it wasn't the strength of Nicholas I's autocracy that led to his downfall. It was his inability to change, to listen, and to evolve. It was the refusal to see that the world around him was shifting, and that the empire he sought to preserve could only survive if it adapted to the changing realities of the time. As we look at his legacy, let us remember that the true strength of leadership lies not in control, but in trust and the willingness to evolve. Just as Nicholas I's failure to embrace change led to the downfall of his empire, we must learn to embrace the inevitability of change in our own lives. Power, when wielded with humility and a willingness to adapt, has the potential to create lasting, meaningful change. But without these qualities, power can be nothing more than an illusion, a brittle construct that, in the end, is bound to collapse. The tragedy of Nicholas I's reign is not just that his empire fell, but that it could have been different. It could have been a reign of transformation, of adaptation, and of growth. But instead, it became a lesson in the dangers of inflexibility, a lesson we would do well to remember as we navigate our own journeys. Nicholas I's reign, in many ways, was the epitome of strength, but that strength came at a heavy price. His unshakable belief in autocracy, in absolute power, and in the preservation of Russian imperial supremacy led him to impose a system that demanded complete obedience from the people. Yet, it is this very insistence on total control that ultimately laid the groundwork for the downfall of both his reign and the empire itself. This is a tale of power, control, and the silent, insidious erosion that occurs when the human element of leadership is forgotten in favor of rigid authority. It's the story of how the pursuit of stability and strength through force can end up leading to instability and division. More than just the collapse of an empire, it's a lesson in leadership, one that we all need to pay attention to. The paradox of Nicholas I's reign is undeniable. He was a Tsar who sought to maintain Russian order with an iron grip, but in doing so, he unknowingly set in motion the forces that would eventually unravel that very order. His policies were designed to quash dissent, to stifle any voices that might challenge his authority, and to maintain the facade of stability. Yet, the very essence of true stability was undermined by his refusal to consider the needs and voices of his people. Autocracy, when left unchecked, becomes a force that divides rather than unites. Nicholas I, in his attempt to hold everything together, failed to realize that unity cannot be maintained by force alone. It must be nurtured through understanding, flexibility, and empathy. This is the core lesson that we can take from his reign. One of the most significant aspects of Nicholas I's rule was his determination to crush any form of rebellion. His response to uprisings was swift and brutal, often turning to the might of the military to restore order. The Polish uprising of 1830 is perhaps the most striking example of this. The revolt was a direct challenge to Russian rule, and Nicholas I did not hesitate to suppress it with overwhelming force. His military success in crushing the rebellion came at a great personal and political cost. Instead of fostering loyalty through understanding and compromise, he turned to violence, further alienating the Polish population. His treatment of Poland is a microcosm of his broader approach to governance, one that focused on suppressing any challenge to his authority without regard to the long-term consequences. The irony is that his desire to maintain control over the empire by silencing dissent only made it harder for him to achieve the stability he sought. His policies created a growing sense of resentment among the people, particularly those who felt oppressed by the lack of freedom or voice in the governance of their country. The more NicholasI tried to assert his authority, the more he isolated himself from his people, who began to view him not as a protector, but as a tyrant. His refusal to listen to their grievances or entertain the possibility of reform left him in an ever-shrinking circle of influence. While he believed his actions were necessary to preserve the empire, they were in fact accelerating its collapse. Nicholas I's reign was also marked by a profound failure to adapt to the changing times. As Europe was moving toward more democratic forms of governance, Russia remained entrenched in its autocratic system. Nicholas I's stubbornness prevented him from seeing that the world was evolving around him, and that the political structures of the past could no longer sustain the empire. The 19th century was a time of great political and social change, and monarchies across Europe were being replaced by constitutional governments, yet Russia remained locked in a system that was fundamentally out of touch with the demands of its people and the changing dynamics of the world. The Tsar's refusal to consider reform created a society that was stagnant, one that failed to evolve with the times. His autocracy, once seen as a stabilizing force, became a symbol of oppression and decay. This failure to adapt was not just a political misstep, it was a personal failure. Nicholas I, a man of strong convictions, refused to acknowledge that the power he sought to preserve could not be sustained through force alone. The world was changing, and his rigid adherence to autocracy blinded him to the fact that political and social systems must be flexible in order to survive. His inability to see beyond his own vision for Russia is perhaps the greatest tragedy of his reign. Had he been willing to engage with the world around him, to listen to the voices calling for change, he could have transformed Russia into a modern power capable of competing on the world stage. But instead, he chose to entrench himself in a system that was destined to collapse. This lesson, the importance of flexibility in leadership, is not just relevant to politicians or rulers. It applies to all of us. How often do we, in our own lives, find ourselves clinging to old ideas or old ways of thinking because they provide us with a sense of security? How often do we fear change, even when it is clear that the world is moving forward? Nicholas I's failure to adapt to the changing political landscape of Europe is a cautionary tale about the dangers of resisting change. Whether in our careers, our personal lives, or our leadership roles, we must learn to recognize when it is time to evolve, to listen, and to adjust to the world around us. Nicholas I's reign also serves as a reminder of the dangers of absolute power. His autocracy was not just a political system, it was a way of life, a philosophy that defined his entire approach to governance. But absolute power, when left unchecked, becomes dangerous. It alienates people, suppresses creativity, and stifles progress. Nicholas I's insistence on maintaining control over every aspect of Russian life created a climate of fear and resentment. It led to the rise of revolutionary movements, and eventually to the collapse of the empire he sought to protect. The more he sought to dominate, the more the people pushed back. The lesson here is clear. True power is not about control, but about balance, understanding, and the ability to adapt. The tragic flaw of Nicholas I was his inability to recognize that power is not infinite. It is not something that can be held on to indefinitely without consequences. The more he clung to his vision of Russia, the more he pushed the empire toward destruction. Had he been able to step back and view the situation objectively, he may have seen that the empire's survival depended on his ability to evolve, to listen to the voices of his people, and to engage with the changing world around him. Instead, his rigid vision for Russia, his failure to embrace change, became the very thing that brought about its downfall. This story of a ruler who could not change, who could not adapt, is not just a historical lesson, it is a lesson for all of us. Whether we are leaders, employees, parents, or simply individuals trying to navigate life, we must understand that our strength lies not in our ability to hold on to the past, but in our ability to evolve with the times. Nicholas I's story is a reminder that, in the end, nothing, no empire, no leadership, no person is invincible. Power, when misused, becomes its own undoing. It's a lesson in the fragility of control and the importance of adaptability. The legacy of Nicholas I, therefore, is not one of strength, but of tragedy. His reign may have been marked by military victories and a facade of order, but beneath the surface, his refusal to adapt, to listen, and to embrace change sealed the fate of the Russian Empire. His story is a cautionary tale for all of us, a reminder that power, when held too tightly, is doomed to slip through our fingers. It's a lesson that, no matter how strong we may appear on the outside, true strength lies in our ability to listen, to grow, and to change. The collapse of the Russian Empire under Nicholas I serves as a reminder that even the most powerful systems are not immune to the forces of change. When we resist those forces, we do so at our own peril. The tragic story of Nicholas I is not merely a tale of a ruler's fall, but rather an exploration of human nature, the complex balance between power and vulnerability, and the often unseen consequences of stubbornness. When we examine Nicholas I's refusal to adapt and his relentless pursuit of an outdated vision, we are reminded of a universal truth. The more we resist change, the more inevitable it becomes. His reign teaches us that the most powerful empires no matter how strong or well defended, can crumble under the weight of their own rigidity. Reflecting on Nicholas I's reign forces us to confront our own relationship with control. There's a deep-seated belief in many cultures, whether in leadership, in relationships, or within ourselves, that stability is synonymous with control. It's a comforting thought to think that by maintaining a firm hand, we can ensure peace, order, and predictability. But the reality is far more nuanced. Control, when abused or held too tightly, becomes an oppressive force that stifles creativity, alienates people, and ultimately leads to rebellion. What Nicholas I failed to understand was that true stability doesn't come from dominance. It arises from a willingness to listen, to engage, and to evolve with the changing times. This principle holds especially true in leadership. In every facet of life, whether personal or professional, stubbornness and an unwillingness to adapt to the evolving landscape can be the death knell of even the most promising initiatives. Nicholas I's failure to listen to his people, to understand the deeper currents of social change within Europe, and his refusal to reform left him isolated. He failed to see the power of empathy, of creating space for others to express their views and shape the world alongside him. The same is true for us in our own lives. When we cling to old ways of thinking, believing that we know the only right way, we blind ourselves to new possibilities. We alienate those around us and close ourselves off from the solutions that are often right in front of us. NicholasI believed that suppressing dissent and keeping the empire under a tight leash would secure Russia's future. But in doing so, he created an environment of fear and resentment that had long-lasting repercussions. In the same way, any leadership approach that focuses solely on maintaining power through control, intimidation, and suppression of free thought eventually leads to the alienation of those very people it intends to protect. Nicholas I's insistence on stifling opposition made the seeds of rebellion grow in ways that he could not have foreseen. It's an important lesson for anyone in a leadership position. We must not only act with decisiveness but also with humility, listening to the voices of the people we lead and recognizing that true strength lies in partnership, collaboration, and openness. This is not just an academic lesson, it is deeply personal. There are moments in life when each of us will be faced with the opportunity to let go of control, to embrace change, and to adapt to new circumstances. These moments often come with discomfort, with fear of the unknown, but they are essential. When we persist in holding on to things that no longer serve us, whether it's a job, a relationship, or a way of thinking, we risk stagnation. And like Nicholas I, we may find ourselves fighting a losing battle. The greatest lesson we can learn from his reign is that the pursuit of control, when unchecked by empathy or adaptation, ultimately leads to personal and collective failure. We all experience the pressures of life that can make us feel like we need to hold on to control. In a world full of uncertainties, it's easy to feel that maintaining rigid structures is the only way to preserve our peace of mind or our success. However, when we refuse to let go of the reins, we close ourselves off to the opportunities for growth, creativity, and evolution that exist in every changing moment. This holds true not only in leadership but also in personal growth. If we remain unwilling to change, to learn, and to adapt to the lessons life throws at us, we too risk becoming like Nicholas I, leaders of fading empires, holding on to a vision that no longer fits with the world around us. Nicholas I's downfall, then, serves as a reminder of the fragility of control. He believed that by holding everything together with force, he was protecting his empire. But what he failed to see was that in the process, he was breaking it apart. The Russian Empire was not destroyed overnight, but rather, it eroded slowly from the inside out. Every decision that pushed the people further from the center of power, every moment of suppression, every refusal to listen, contributed to a growing resentment that would eventually bring down his reign. As we reflect on his story, we are left with a deep personal question. Are we, in our own lives, clinging too tightly to outdated ideas, outdated systems, or outdated beliefs? And are we willing to evolve and adapt to the new world around us? The lesson from Nicholas I's reign is clear. Power, when held too tightly, is a fleeting thing. It is only through flexibility, humility, and an openness to change that we can ensure stability, not just for an empire, but for ourselves, for our families, and for our communities. The greatest leaders, the greatest human beings, are those who understand that change is inevitable and that true power lies in the ability to grow with it. Nicholas I's downfall is a story of pride and refusal to change, but it is also an invitation for us all to consider how we, too, can learn from the past and build a future where leadership and life itself are based on understanding, collaboration, and the willingness to evolve. Nicholas I ruled Russia at a pivotal moment in history, an era that demanded both leadership and flexibility. Yet, his reign, marked by strict autocracy, unwavering control, and repression of dissent, also sowed the seeds of a revolution that would ultimately unravel the empire he so desperately sought to preserve. At the heart of his rule lay an unrelenting belief in autocracy as the bedrock of Russia's stability. This belief was so deeply entrenched in his psyche that he viewed any threat to autocratic power not as a challenge to his reign, but as an existential threat to the very existence of the empire. It was this rigidity, this inability to adapt, that led to the collapse of his empire. Nicholas I's failure to understand the necessity of evolution in leadership is a lesson that continues to resonate in every facet of leadership today. Nicholas I inherited the throne after the death of his brother, Tsar Alexander I, and immediately found himself at the helm of an empire that stretched across vast territories. To him, the mantle of power was not merely a privilege. It was a responsibility to protect the very foundation of Russia. But his understanding of this responsibility was rooted in a vision of absolute control. It was a vision where power was concentrated in the hands of the Tsar, where the state was governed through rigid, top-down authority. In his mind, this was the only way to maintain the empire's strength and stability. However, as we know now, this was a grave miscalculation, one that would have profound consequences for the Russian people and their future. Autocracy, in its purest form, leaves little room for the people's voice. This was a fundamental flaw in Nicholas I's leadership. His reign was built on a system that suppressed dissent, that silenced the very voices that could have helped Russia evolve and modernize. Under Nicholas, any challenge to the Tsar's authority was not just met with resistance, but with a force that extinguished any possibility of growth or reform. The infamous Third Section, the secret police force he created, became the symbol of his repressive policies. It was a tool for hunting down anyone who dared to challenge the regime. From intellectuals to ordinary citizens, universities were monitored, political movements were suppressed, and the very essence of free thought was stifled. In a society where people were denied the right to think freely, to express dissatisfaction, or to voice their hopes for a better future, the seeds of rebellion were bound to be sown. But what was the cost of this repression? In his pursuit of control, Nicholas I may have thought he was securing Russia's future, but in reality, he was sowing division, alienating his people, and setting the stage for the revolution that would tear his empire apart. The more he suppressed dissent, the more discontent festered beneath the surface. The more he sought to hold on to power through fear and intimidation, the more he eroded the very loyalty that once existed. His obsession with control made him blind to the growing dissatisfaction of the people. His refusal to listen to their voices, to understand their needs, and to engage with them on a deeper level, led to the gradual erosion of his legitimacy. He may have held the reins of power tightly, but the people those he sought to control became increasingly disengaged from his rule. In his eyes, he was protecting the empire. In theirs, he was a tyrant. The failure of Nicholas I lies not just in his autocratic vision, but in his refusal to adapt to the changing world around him. Throughout Europe, the winds of political change were blowing strong. New ideas were emerging, and the concept of democracy was gaining ground. But Nicholas I remained steadfast in his belief that autocracy was the only path forward. He saw Europe's political upheavals as a threat to Russia's stability, but what he failed to see was that these upheavals were the result of societies coming to terms with their own evolving needs. Europe was embracing new ideas, and Russia was being left behind. Nicholas I's refusal to entertain the possibility of reform kept Russia in a state of stagnation, while France, Britain, and other European powers were beginning to embrace political and social reforms, Russia remained locked in the past. This reluctance to change left the Russian Empire vulnerable to the very forces that Nicholas sought to suppress. The rigidity of his reign created a society that was incapable of evolving alongside the rest of the world. As the political and social landscapes of Europe shifted, Russia remained firmly rooted in a system that no longer served the needs of its people. In the face of this change, Nicholas clung to his vision of absolute control, unaware that the empire he sought to preserve was slowly being consumed by the forces of time. One of the most significant moments in Nicholas I's reign that exemplifies his inability to adapt was his response to the Polish uprising of 1830. The Polish people, who had long suffered under Russian domination, rose up against Russian rule in a bid for independence. Nicholas I, determined to quash the rebellion at all costs, responded with overwhelming force. His military crushed the revolt, but in doing so, he further alienated the Polish people. Instead of fostering loyalty through understanding and negotiation, he sought to maintain control through violence. This approach did not lead to unity. It deepened the divisions within the empire and set the stage for future uprisings. The Polish uprising was not an isolated incident, but a reflection of a broader pattern in Nicholas I's rule. His inability to recognize that power can only be sustained if it is rooted in mutual respect, compromise, and understanding. This same theme of inflexibility runs throughout Nicholas I's reign. His refusal to embrace reform and engage with the evolving political landscape of Europe created a climate of stagnation. His policies were designed to suppress dissent, but they also suppressed the very innovation that Russia needed to thrive. The refusal to reform, to modernize, and to listen to the voices of the people left Russia vulnerable to the pressures of change. This failure to evolve, this refusal to adapt, ultimately made Nicholas I's reign a tragedy, not just for him, but for the entire Russian Empire. We can learn a great deal from Nicholas I's failure to adapt. In our own lives, we often face the temptation to hold on to control, to resist change, and to cling to the way things have always been. But the lesson of Nicholas I is clear. When we fail to adapt, when we refuse to evolve, we risk becoming irrelevant. Whether in leadership, personal growth, or relationships, flexibility is key. Stubbornness in the face of change only leads to isolation and division. True leadership, whether on a grand scale or in our own lives, requires the ability to evolve, to listen, and to understand the needs of those we lead. Nicholas I's tragic story is a reminder that power, when held too tightly, will slip through our fingers. It's a lesson about the fragility of control, the need for adaptability, and the consequences of ignoring the changing tides of time. Nicholas I's reign serves as a powerful reminder that no empire, no matter how vast or powerful, is immune to the forces of change. His obsession with control and his refusal to engage with the evolving world around him led to the collapse of the empire he sought to protect. The lesson we take from his story is not just one of political strategy, but one of personal growth. When we fail to embrace change, when we refuse to let go of outdated beliefs or systems, we risk our own downfall. The most powerful leaders are not those who cling to control, but those who understand that leadership is about humility, adaptability, and the willingness to evolve. The collapse of Nicholas I's empire is a tragic reminder of the price of stubbornness. His story teaches us that the greatest strength lies in our ability to listen, adapt, and grow with the times. It is this flexibility that ensures not just survival, but success in an ever-changing world. As we reflect on the legacy of Nicholas I, it becomes impossible to ignore the human element behind his reign. The same element that drove his decisions, shaped his worldview, and ultimately contributed to his downfall. Nicholas I was not a tyrant for the sake of cruelty, but a man deeply invested in his understanding of duty and power. However, as history has shown, the very qualities that propelled him to the throne, his strong convictions, his belief in the necessity of absolute control, were also the very ones that led to his empire's undoing. The tragedy of Nicholas I lies in his inability to shift his perspective, to recognize that leadership is not just about power, but about compassion, humility, and the capacity to adapt. In many ways, Nicholas I was a product of his time, a time when autocracy was still seen as the natural order, a time when rulers believed that strength could only come from rigid control. This mindset is not unique to Nicholas I. It is a part of the human condition, particularly for those in power. We all tend to cling to the familiar, especially when it offers us security. But the danger of this mindset is that it can blind us to the changing world around us, and as time moves forward, our strength becomes our weakness. Nicholas I's refusal to engage with the evolving political climate of Europe is a stark reminder of this danger. The world was evolving, and while Europe embraced the ideals of democracy and liberty, Nicholas I remained anchored in the past, holding on to a vision of control that was increasingly out of sync with the world. This inability to embrace change is a lesson that transcends the realm of politics. In our own lives, how often do we refuse to let go of old habits, outdated beliefs, or systems that no longer serve us? Whether in personal relationships, careers, or societal structures, we often face the temptation to hold on to what we know because it offers us comfort, however fragile it may be. Nicholas I's downfall was not simply the result of his political choices, but of his inability to evolve as a person. Leadership, at its core, is not just about managing power. It is about understanding that true strength comes from the ability to grow, to learn, and to adapt. Imagine the course of history if Nicholas I had been willing to listen to the cries for reform, to recognize that the Russian Empire needed to evolve alongside Europe. What if he had embraced the voices of those who called for political change and allowed for some level of freedom and representation? Could he have steered Russia into a new era of prosperity, one that would have avoided the revolution that would eventually sweep the empire away? The answer remains speculative, but one thing is clear: his failure to adapt to the changing times became the very catalyst for the empire's collapse. This lesson also speaks to the larger human experience about the importance of flexibility, empathy, and understanding in leadership. Nicholas I's refusal to see the needs and desires of his people, to acknowledge the changing dynamics of Europe, led to a rigid society that became more and more disconnected from the world around it. The more NicholasI tried to maintain control through suppression, the more he alienated his people. They were not simply subjects under his rule. They were individuals with voices, hopes, and desires. By ignoring them, he did not just harm his reputation, he set in motion the forces that would tear apart his empire. The lesson for us today is profound. Whether we are in positions of leadership or simply navigating the complexities of our personal lives, the ability to listen, to engage, and to evolve is paramount. True leadership is not about clinging to power at all costs. It is about the ability to understand the needs of others, to adapt to changing circumstances, and to lead with humility and foresight. Nicholas I's tragedy lies not just in his political miscalculations, but in his inability to evolve as a human being, both as a ruler and as a person. The greatest strength in leadership lies not in the ability to dominate, but in the ability to inspire and to evolve with those we lead. As we look back on the reign of Nicholas I, we can't help but see the cost of his inflexibility, a cost that was paid by millions of people who lived under the shadow of his rule. His legacy is one of missed opportunity, of a world that could have been different had he been willing to change. The Russian Empire, for all its vastness, could not withstand the weight of an outdated system of governance. And in the end, neither could Nicholas I. This is not just a lesson for political leaders, it is a lesson for all of us. It teaches us the importance of being open to change, of being flexible in our thinking, and of understanding that leadership, whether in politics, business, or personal life, requires more than just control. It requires empathy, wisdom, and the ability to grow with the times. The collapse of the Russian Empire and the downfall of Nicholas I remind us that the world does not stand still. If we refuse to move with it, we risk being swept away. In our personal lives, we all face moments where we must choose whether to cling to the past or to embrace the future. The story of Nicholas I is a cautionary tale about the dangers of clinging to outdated beliefs and systems. The empire that he so desperately sought to preserve was ultimately brought down by the very inflexibility that he believed would save it. His story reminds us that true strength does not lie in holding on to control, but in the ability to adapt and evolve. Only by embracing change, by listening to the voices of those around us, and by learning from the lessons of history, can we avoid the same fate that befell Nicholas I. In the end, the greatest lesson we can learn from his reign is not just about leadership but about life itself. It is about recognizing that the world is constantly changing and that our ability to grow, to adapt, and to embrace new ideas is what will determine our success. Power, when misused, becomes the very thing that destroys us. The collapse of the Russian Empire was a tragic consequence of a ruler's inability to let go of the past and embrace the future. And so, the legacy of Nicholas I serves as a powerful reminder for all of us that the greatest strength lies in the ability to listen, to evolve, and to grow. When we think about the forces that shape our lives, we often consider the immediate and the visible things, like economic shifts, personal choices, and social movements. However, the more subtle forces, the ones we don't immediately notice, are often the most consequential. The refusal to adapt to change is one of the most destructive forces in both personal and societal development. It's easy to believe that maintaining control and sticking to old systems guarantees stability. But, as history has shown time and again, it is this very resistance to change that can lead to collapse. The refusal to evolve isn't just a mistake, it's a tragedy that reverberates through generations. The story of Nicholas I is a stark reminder of this fact. A man who sought to preserve his empire's strength by holding on to an old order, only to unknowingly drive it toward ruin. Nicholas I's reign began with an unyielding desire to protect Russia from the uncertainties of the modern world. When he ascended to the throne, the world was changing around him, but his vision for Russia was locked in the past. He viewed autocracy as the ultimate safeguard for stability. By consolidating power and suppressing dissent, he believed he was ensuring the survival of the Russian Empire. But as time went on, his refusal to adapt to the rapidly changing political landscape of Europe created a rift between the empire and the rest of the world. This resistance to change can be seen as a metaphor for the broader struggles we all face in our lives. How often do we hold on to outdated beliefs, whether in our careers, relationships, or personal growth, simply because they feel secure? Nicholas I, like so many before and after him, mistook rigidity for strength. But true strength comes not from control or unbending rules, but from the ability to listen, adapt, and evolve. He believed that clinging to power would protect Russia, yet in doing so, he allowed the very forces of change to gather in the shadows, ready to explode when the time was right. As we look at Nicholas I's reign, it becomes clear that his greatest flaw was not his military failures or even his repression of political opposition, but his inability to see the world as it truly was. Europe was undergoing profound changes. Nations were moving toward democracy, embracing new forms of governance, and challenging the traditional structures of power. But Nicholas I refused to engage with these shifts. Instead of looking at them as an opportunity for growth, he saw them as threats. This blind spot cost him dearly. It was this failure to recognize the inevitable march of time that led to the downfall of an empire he sought so desperately to preserve. The more NicholasI clung to his autocratic rule, the more the Russian people grew disillusioned. At first, they may have looked to him as a protector, someone who could safeguard their lives from external and internal threats. But over time, his policies of repression and censorship stifled the very spirit of innovation and progress that Russia needed. Intellectuals, artists, and thinkers were silenced. Political dissent was crushed, and the Russian people, unable to express their desires or hopes for a better future, grew restless. In many ways, Nicholas I's empire became a pressure cooker, where the boiling discontent beneath the surface could only be contained for so long. His failure to listen to the voices of his people left him isolated. He created an environment where change was not just stifled, it was punished. This created a perfect storm for revolution. The more Nicholas sought to control, the more he alienated the people, creating the very conditions that would lead to the downfall of his empire. But the tragedy of Nicholas I's reign wasn't just that he failed to see the winds of change, it was that he actively resisted them. In his desire to maintain control, he rejected reform. The Russian Empire was a vast, diverse entity, and it needed a ruler who could understand its complexities. But Nicholas I wasn't interested in complexity. He was interested in simplicity, an iron rule that could keep everything in line. Yet, as history shows us, societies that are rigid and unyielding cannot withstand the tests of time. Societies need flexibility, creativity, and openness to survive. What is perhaps most heartbreaking about Nicholas I's reign is that he was not an evil man. He was, in fact, a deeply devoted leader who genuinely believed that he was doing what was best for Russia. But in his blindness to the changing world around him, he ended up creating the very instability he sought to avoid. His refusal to adapt to the times was not a calculated choice, it was a failure of vision. He believed that by holding on to the old systems of autocracy, he was preserving Russia's greatness. But in reality, he was condemning it to an inevitable collapse. This lesson is one that resonates far beyond the realm of politics. How many times have we, in our own lives, refused to change? How many times have we held on to relationships, careers, or beliefs long past their expiration date, simply because we feared the unknown? Nicholas I's downfall is a cautionary tale about the dangers of complacency. The world moves forward, whether we are ready for it or not. The only choice we have is how we respond to it. One of the key takeaways from Nicholas I's story is the importance of flexibility in leadership. Whether you are leading a country, a team, or even just your own life, the ability to adapt is crucial. Stubbornness is often seen as a virtue in leaders, but it can just as easily be their undoing. Leaders who refuse to listen to their people, to evolve with the times, and to embrace change are doomed to failure. Nicholas I's inability to engage with the changing world led to the disintegration of the very empire he sought to protect. But his failure is not just a historical lesson, it's a personal one for all of us. As individuals, we often face similar challenges. We all have moments where we must decide whether to hold on to the past or step into the future. The more we resist change, the more we isolate ourselves from the world around us. The refusal to adapt can have profound consequences, both personally and professionally. Like Nicholas I, we may find ourselves clinging to outdated systems, refusing to let go of old ways of thinking, and in doing so, we risk falling behind. True growth comes from the ability to let go of what no longer serves us and to embrace the new opportunities that await. Nicholas I's failure to embrace reform, to listen to his people, and to engage with the evolving world around him is a reminder that nothing in life is static. The world is always changing, and those who refuse to change with it are left behind. The collapse of Nicholas I's empire serves as a powerful reminder that we must remain flexible, open-minded, and willing to change in order to survive and thrive. Leadership, whether in politics, business, or personal life, is not about control. It's about the ability to adapt and evolve. In the end, Nicholas I's story is not just about the fall of an empire. It's a reflection on the nature of power, the inevitability of change, and the dangers of inflexibility. His refusal to adapt to the shifting tides of history led to the collapse of the Russian Empire and set the stage for the revolutions that would change the course of history. But his story also offers hope. It reminds us that, even in the face of great adversity, we can learn from the past and adapt to the future. The strength to change is the strength that ensures survival. And it is this lesson that Nicholas I's story imparts. True strength lies not in rigidity, but in flexibility. It is this flexibility that enables us to endure and, ultimately, to thrive in a world that is always evolving. Nicholas I's reign offers a profound reflection on the impact of inflexibility and an unwillingness to adapt. As we consider the story of his leadership, we find that his struggle with change is more than just a historical account. It is a poignant, timeless lesson about leadership, progress, and human nature itself. The inability to evolve is not just a political failure, it is a personal one that touches all of us. We each face moments in our lives where change is necessary, yet we resist it out of fear, comfort, or a false sense of security. Nicholas I's downfall is not only a cautionary tale for rulers, but a powerful reminder for all individuals, families, businesses, and communities. In our personal lives, how often do we hold on to outdated beliefs or stagnant patterns of behavior simply because they feel familiar or safe? The fear of the unknown, the reluctance to change, often traps us in cycles that limit our potential. Nicholas I's reign exemplifies this fear, not only on a personal level, but on a national scale. He believed that if he held steadfast to his vision of autocracy, he could protect Russia from the forces of change. However, his refusal to evolve led to the gradual unraveling of the very fabric of his empire. It's a powerful reminder that growth, both personal and societal, requires change that can feel uncomfortable and uncertain, but is necessary for progress. Consider, for a moment, how this applies to leadership in the modern world. We often see leaders in various fields, whether in politics, business, or even within families, who remain entrenched in their ways, fearing that embracing new ideas or approaches will undermine their authority. Like Nicholas I, they become convinced that control is the key to success. But the truth is that leadership is not about control. It's about guidance, adaptability, and understanding the needs of the people you lead. If you refuse to listen, refuse to engage with the changing world around you, you not only isolate yourself from the present, but also set the stage for failure. Nicholas I's inability to evolve was rooted in his unyielding belief that autocracy was the only path to stability. This belief, while undoubtedly well-intentioned, created an environment where growth was stifled. His policies of repression and control, meant to preserve the empire, ultimately led to its destruction. In seeking to protect Russia, he ignored the voices of the people, failing to realize that true power lies in collaboration, in listening to others, and in adapting to the needs of a constantly changing world. The lesson of flexibility is vital in every aspect of our lives. We cannot grow if we remain stubbornly fixed in old patterns. When we fail to adapt, we risk falling behind, both personally and professionally. This doesn't mean abandoning all principles or discarding everything that once worked, but it means recognizing when something is no longer serving us and being open to new ways of thinking and doing. Nicholas I's failure to reform is a clear example of what happens when leaders become so consumed with preserving their old systems that they fail to see the signs of change and opportunity. It's easy to believe that sticking to what we know guarantees stability, but in reality, it's the willingness to change that ensures long-term success. In the world of business, for instance, companies that refuse to innovate often find themselves overtaken by more agile competitors. The corporate world is full of examples where companies that were once industry leaders collapsed because they clung too tightly to outdated business models. They failed to see the changing needs of their customers, and by the time they recognized the shift, it was too late. The same is true for personal development. Those who refuse to adapt to new ideas and opportunities often find themselves trapped in situations that no longer serve their well-being or growth. This is where Nicholas I's story takes on a personal dimension. We all, at some point, face the temptation to hold on to the past. Whether it's a belief system, a career path, or a relationship that has long since run its course, we often resist the inevitable changes that are necessary for growth. We may resist because it's easier to stay in our comfort zones than to face the uncertainty of the unknown. But as Nicholas I's downfall teaches us, this resistance can have devastating consequences. Leadership, whether in politics, business, or family life, requires not just strength, but wisdom. Wisdom comes from the ability to recognize when things are no longer working and to take the steps necessary to change course. It involves understanding the forces at play, both internal and external, and being willing to shift direction when necessary. When we refuse to adapt, we close ourselves off to new possibilities. This leads to stagnation, frustration, and ultimately, failure. In our personal lives, this can manifest in many ways. For example, when we refuse to let go of toxic relationships or unhealthy habits, we are refusing to change. When we stay in jobs that drain us, believing that stability is worth the cost of our happiness, we are resisting change. In all these cases, we are repeating the mistakes of history. Nicholas I's failure to evolve with the changing times cost him not only his empire, but the very opportunity for growth and transformation. The same holds true for us. When we fail to make necessary changes in our lives, we stifle our own potential for growth and fulfillment. But the story of Nicholas I's reign also offers hope. It serves as a reminder that we are not condemned to repeat the mistakes of the past. We have the ability to change, to adapt, and to grow. The world is always evolving, and those who are willing to grow with it will thrive. It's never too late to start adapting, to embrace new ideas, and to learn from our past mistakes. Nicholas I's story is a powerful testament to the dangers of inflexibility, but it's also a reminder of the incredible potential that lies in change. At its core, Nicholas I's failure to embrace change is a reflection of the human condition, the tendency to resist the unknown, to fear what lies ahead, and to hold on to what we know for dear life. But in resisting change, we also resist growth, and ultimately, we resist life itself. Nicholas I's downfall can serve as a catalyst for our own reflection. Are we holding on to outdated beliefs or systems that no longer serve us? Are we resisting change because it feels too uncomfortable, too uncertain? The greatest strength, as Nicholas I's story reminds us, lies in our ability to adapt and evolve. The future belongs to those who are willing to embrace it, to let go of the past, and to move forward with an open heart and mind. Change is not easy, but it is necessary, and those who embrace it are the ones who ultimately thrive. The tragedy of Nicholas I's reign teaches us that change is inevitable, and that it's better to lead it than to be led by it. If we want to ensure our own survival and success, both personally and as part of a larger community, we must remain open to change. Only then can we unlock the potential that lies ahead. Nicholas I's reign, defined by his unwavering commitment to autocracy, offers not just a historical account, but also a powerful lesson on the dangers of inflexibility. His refusal to adapt to the evolving world around him, to embrace the winds of change, led to the downfall of the Russian Empire, a fate he sought desperately to avoid. His story is a poignant reminder that leadership, both political and personal, requires more than just strength or control. It requires vision, humility, and the courage to evolve with the times. At the core of Nicholas I's leadership was an unwavering belief in autocracy as the ultimate form of governance, a belief that shaped every aspect of his rule. He inherited a vast empire and felt an immense responsibility to protect it. For him, the power of the Tsar was not just a privilege, it was a shield against the chaos of the world. But this unbending desire to preserve the traditional structures of power would become his greatest flaw. His autocratic vision, while initially successful in maintaining order, failed to account for the changing needs of his people and the political landscape of Europe. As the world around him began to embrace new ideas of democracy, equality, and freedom, Nicholas I's rigid adherence to autocracy became more of a hindrance than a strength. His approach to governance was rooted in a belief that control was the key to stability. By suppressing dissent and quashing any challenge to his authority, he believed that Russia would remain strong and united. This approach was marked by a heavy reliance on the secret police, the Third Section, which operated with near total impunity to root out any form of opposition. Universities were monitored, intellectuals were silenced, and political movements were crushed. But in seeking to maintain control through fear and repression, Nicholas I alienated the very people he sought to protect. His policies of suppression fostered resentment, and as discontent simmered beneath the surface, the foundation of his empire began to crack. This is a crucial lesson for us all. Leadership that is based on fear and suppression may maintain control in the short term, but it does not foster loyalty or create a sustainable foundation for the future. True leadership is not about power or domination. It is about understanding, empathy, and the ability to adapt. NicholasI failed to see this, and as he clung to his vision of absolute power, he pushed his people further away. His refusal to listen, to engage with his citizens, or to recognize the shifting tides of history set the stage for the revolution that would eventually bring down his empire. The tragedy of Nicholas I's reign lies not just in his failure to modernize, but in his inability to recognize the needs of the people. As Europe moved toward more democratic forms of government, Russia remained entrenched in its autocratic past. The world was changing, and Nicholas I's refusal to adapt to these changes left Russia isolated and vulnerable. His lack of engagement with the political currents of Europe meant that Russia fell further behind as other nations embraced new forms of governance. The longer Nicholas I held on to the old ways, the more his empire slipped from his grasp. One of the most striking examples of Nicholas I's inability to adapt was his handling of the Polish uprising of 1830. When the Polish people, long oppressed by Russian rule, rose up in rebellion, Nicholas I responded with overwhelming force. His military crushed the revolt, but his actions came at a significant cost. Instead of seeking a path to reconciliation, he sought to impose Russian rule through violence. This approach not only deepened the resentment of the Polish people, but also created a lasting wound in the empire. The Polish uprising serves as a powerful metaphor for Nicholas I's broader approach to governance. Rather than embracing the opportunity to listen to his people, to understand their grievances, he chose repression. This decision was not just a political miscalculation, it was a personal one as well. Nicholas I's refusal to engage with his people, to hear their voices, ultimately led to the alienation of those very people he sought to control. This is where the true lesson of Nicholas I's reign lies: the failure to listen. As leaders, whether in politics, business, or personal life, we must be able to listen to the voices of those around us. We must be open to feedback, to criticism, and to the changing needs of the world. If we close ourselves off from the realities around us, we risk becoming irrelevant. Nicholas I's greatest flaw was his inability to recognize that the world was changing, and that in order to maintain power, he needed to engage with those changes. He believed that by maintaining control through autocracy, he was safeguarding the empire. In reality, his refusal to listen to the changing world led to its destruction. The failure of Nicholas I's reign also underscores the importance of flexibility in leadership. Leadership is not about rigidly holding on to a set of beliefs or practices. It's about knowing when to adapt, when to evolve, and when to change direction. Nicholas I's inflexibility in the face of change is what doomed his reign. He held on to a vision of Russia that no longer fit the realities of the time. His refusal to embrace reform was not a matter of principle. It was a matter of fear of losing control, fear of the unknown, and fear of change. But the world does not wait for us to catch up. It moves forward, whether we are ready or not, and those who refuse to move with it, who cling to the past, find themselves left behind. This lesson is not just about political leadership, it's about all of us. In our personal lives, we too face the challenge of adapting to change. Whether it's in our careers, relationships, or personal growth, we must learn to let go of outdated beliefs, habits, and systems that no longer serve us. The world is constantly changing, and if we refuse to change with it, we risk stagnation. Nicholas I's story is a stark reminder that change is inevitable, and it is not something to be feared but embraced. Only through adaptation can we continue to grow and thrive. The tragedy of Nicholas I's reign is that, despite his genuine belief in the righteousness of his cause, he was ultimately undone by his own inflexibility. He sought to preserve his empire, but in the process, he became its greatest threat. His failure to adapt, to listen, and to engage with the changing world around him led to the collapse of the very empire he sought to protect. The lesson here is clear. Leadership is not about control. It's about understanding, empathy, and the ability to evolve with the times. Nicholas I's reign offers a powerful reminder that true strength lies not in rigidity, but in flexibility. The greatest leaders are those who can adapt to the ever-changing world, who can listen to the voices around them, and who can evolve in the face of challenges. As we reflect on the life of Nicholas I, we must recognize the broader implications of his story. The failure to listen, to adapt, and to change is not just a political issue, it's a personal one. In our own lives, we must recognize when it is time to evolve, to embrace change, and to let go of the past. The future belongs to those who are willing to adapt, to change, and to grow. Nicholas I's reign offers us a cautionary tale, but it also offers us an opportunity, a chance to learn from the past and to build a future that is flexible, adaptive, and open to change. In the end, it is through our ability to evolve that we ensure not just survival but success. Nicholas I's reign, while marked by his commitment to autocracy and the preservation of Russia's imperial legacy, underscores a timeless lesson in leadership: the dangers of resisting change. His failure to adapt, to understand the world as it was evolving, and his obsession with control rather than connection, shaped not only his fate, but the fate of the empire he ruled. And yet, as much as his story serves as a cautionary tale of rigidity and stubbornness, it also carries a message of hope, a reminder that we all have the power to change, to grow, and to evolve. The key to understanding Nicholas I's tragic fall lies in the rigidity of his leadership. He believed that by maintaining absolute control, he could safeguard Russia's future. His vision was one of stability through autocracy, but what he failed to see was that true stability cannot be achieved by suppressing the voices of the people. When we, as individuals or as leaders, isolate ourselves from the needs and desires of those around us, we risk creating an environment where change is impossible and progress is stifled. Nicholas I, by choosing control over engagement, by choosing the comfort of tradition over the discomfort of change, set in motion the very forces that would ultimately bring his empire to its knees. This truth applies not only to politics, but to every aspect of our lives. How many times do we resist change, both in our personal lives and our work? How often do we cling to outdated habits, beliefs, and ways of thinking, simply because they feel comfortable or secure? Nicholas I's reign is a stark reminder that the world is constantly changing, whether we are ready for it or not. And if we fail to change with it, we risk losing touch with the very people we seek to lead, to protect, and to serve. In our careers, we face the same challenges. The world of work is evolving at an increasingly rapid pace, with new technologies, systems, and expectations transforming industries overnight. Those who hold on too tightly to old ways of doing things, who resist innovation, will find themselves left behind. True success comes not from resisting change, but from embracing it, finding ways to adapt, learn, and grow with the world around us. This is the lesson that Nicholas I's reign teaches us. His failure to listen, to evolve, and to engage with the world as it changed left Russia isolated and stagnant, unable to keep up with the demands of an increasingly modern world. In relationships too, this lesson rings true. How often do we hold on to old patterns of behavior long after they have stopped serving us? We may cling to old grudges, outdated expectations, or the security of familiar routines, even when they no longer bring us happiness or growth. Nicholas I's story is a reminder that, in order to move forward, we must be willing to let go of what no longer serves us. Change is not something to fear, it is something to embrace. Only through change can we deepen our relationships, grow as individuals, and create a future that is aligned with who we truly are. What is perhaps most poignant about Nicholas I's reign is that he was not an evil man. He genuinely believed that his actions were in the best interests of Russia. He sought to protect his people, to maintain stability, and to ensure the survival of the empire. But in his refusal to adapt, in his single-minded pursuit of control, he unknowingly became the architect of his empire's destruction. His inability to see beyond his own rigid vision of governance blinded him to the fact that true leadership lies in flexibility, humility, and the willingness to evolve with the times. It was his failure to evolve, to listen to the needs of his people, and to engage with the changing world that ultimately led to the collapse of the empire he sought to protect. This serves as a powerful reminder for all of us, not just as leaders but as individuals. How often do we, in our own lives, choose to remain in our comfort zones, refusing to change even when the need for change is glaringly obvious? Nicholas I's reign offers us a stark warning. When we refuse to adapt, when we cling to old systems, beliefs, and ways of thinking, we risk becoming irrelevant. change is inevitable. The key to survival, and even success, lies in our ability to embrace it, to grow from it, and to learn from it. But the story of Nicholas I also offers hope. It is not too late to change, to grow, and to evolve. Each of us has the power to embrace new ideas, to let go of outdated habits, and to redefine our futures. Just as the world around us is constantly evolving, so too can we. The lesson that we take from Nicholas I's tragic story is not that change is dangerous, but that the refusal to change is. It is through our willingness to listen, to adapt, and to evolve that we ensure not just survival, but true success. Whether in our personal lives, our careers, or in leadership, we must recognize that flexibility and adaptability are the keys to thriving in a world that is always shifting. In the end, Nicholas I's story is a powerful reminder of the consequences of inflexibility, but it is also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. We are all capable of change, of growth, and of learning from the past. The story of Nicholas I teaches us that it is not through power or control that we achieve greatness, but through the courage to evolve, the humility to listen, and the strength to embrace the unknown. It is this ability to adapt to the changing world that ensures not only survival, but the opportunity to thrive. Let us take this lesson to heart, and remember that in every aspect of life, it is our ability to grow that truly defines us. The reign of Nicholas I was defined by a profound paradox. While he sought to protect and preserve the Russian Empire, he unwittingly sowed the seeds of its destruction. His unwavering commitment to autocracy, his obsession with control, and his refusal to adapt to the evolving landscape of Europe ultimately sealed the fate of his reign. The more he fought to maintain the old ways, the further Russia drifted from the future it needed. His story is not merely a tale of political miscalculation, it is a timeless lesson about the dangers of inflexibility, the cost of ignoring the will of the people, and the catastrophic consequences of resisting change. At the heart of Nicholas I's rule was an unshakable belief in the supremacy of autocracy. He viewed himself not only as the ruler of Russia, but as its protector, the sole guarantor of its stability and strength. The very power he wielded was, to him, a divine right, a responsibility that transcended the lives of his people. This belief shaped every decision he made and informed his every action, whether it was suppressing dissent, silencing opposition, or quashing any efforts at reform. He sought to build a Russia that was stable, strong, and unified. Yet, in his pursuit of these ideals, he failed to see the fundamental flaw in his approach. Stability cannot be built on fear. Control cannot replace understanding. Autocracy cannot hold forever against the tides of change. Nicholas I's attempt to maintain absolute control through autocracy ultimately backfired. While it may have initially brought a sense of order and cohesion to the empire, it quickly became a prison, a system that stifled creativity, suppressed intellectual progress, and shut out the voices of dissent. His reign was marked by an oppressive atmosphere of surveillance and censorship. The secret police, the Third Section, were tasked with rooting out any form of opposition, while universities, intellectuals, and political movements were systematically monitored and suppressed. The result was a society that became disconnected from its own future, a nation whose people were denied the opportunity to express themselves, to push boundaries, and to shape the future they would inherit. It is easy to mistake control for stability, to believe that by suppressing dissent and eliminating opposition, one can guarantee peace and order. But true stability, as we learn from Nicholas I's reign, is not built on the iron fist of autocracy. It is built on understanding, on the willingness to listen, and on the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Nicholas I's refusal to entertain the possibility of reform was a direct consequence of his failure to recognize that the world around him was evolving, and that Russia could not remain rooted in the past while the rest of Europe was moving forward. By failing to engage with the changing political and social landscape of Europe, he left Russia isolated and vulnerable, unable to respond to the growing needs of its people. This is a lesson that transcends history. It applies to all of us, in our personal lives, our relationships, and our work. How often do we resist change because it feels uncomfortable? How often do we cling to the familiar, the old ways of thinking, because they provide a sense of security? Nicholas I's story is a powerful reminder that change is inevitable, and the refusal to embrace it can have disastrous consequences. Whether in leadership, personal growth, or relationships, we must learn to recognize when it is time to let go of old patterns, beliefs, and habits that no longer serve us. The world is constantly changing, and those who resist this change will inevitably be left behind. The tragedy of Nicholas I's reign was not just that he failed to recognize the need for change, but that he actively resisted it. His response to the Polish uprising of 1830 is a case in point. When the Polish people rose up against Russian rule, Nicholas I responded with overwhelming force, crushing the rebellion without attempting to understand the grievances that had driven it. Rather than seeking a path to reconciliation, he imposed Russian rule through violence. This approach not only deepened the resentment of the Polish people, but it also set a dangerous precedent for the future. It was a refusal to engage with the people, to listen to their voices, and to work toward a solution that would benefit both sides. Instead of fostering unity, Nicholas I's actions deepened divisions within the empire, and the seeds of rebellion took root. This brings us to the crucial lesson of Nicholas I's reign. Leadership is about more than control. It is about empathy, understanding, and the ability to adapt to the changing needs of those you lead. Nicholas I's failure to listen to the voices of his people, to engage with the shifting political and social landscape of Europe, and to consider the evolving needs of Russia, ultimately led to his downfall. He believed that by clinging to the old systems of power, he was preserving Russia's greatness. But in reality, he was condemning it to collapse. Leadership, whether in politics, business, or personal life, requires flexibility. It requires the ability to adapt to the changing needs of the people you serve, to listen to feedback, and to evolve with the times. Nicholas I's inflexibility, his failure to see the world as it was changing, was not just a political mistake, it was a failure of leadership. In his stubborn refusal to entertain reform, he alienated the very people he sought to protect, and in doing so, he set the stage for the revolution that would eventually bring down his empire. This lesson is personal. In our own lives, we are often faced with the same choice that Nicholas I, to embrace change or to resist it. Whether it is in our careers, our relationships, or our personal growth, we must constantly evaluate whether the old systems, beliefs, and habits we hold on to are still serving us. Change can be uncomfortable, even painful, but it is also necessary. Nicholas I's story reminds us that the greatest strength lies not in our ability to hold on to the past, but in our ability to let go of what no longer serves us and to embrace the opportunities that change brings. In the end, Nicholas I's story is not just a political cautionary tale. It is a reflection of the broader human experience. We all face the challenge of adapting to the world around us, of letting go of outdated beliefs and practices, and of embracing the unknown. The collapse of Nicholas I's empire is a stark reminder that power, when held too tightly, becomes fragile. True strength lies not in control, but in the ability to evolve with the times, to listen to the voices around us, and to engage with the changing world in a meaningful way. The lessons of Nicholas I's reign are timeless. Leadership, whether on the grand stage of politics or in the smaller, more personal realms of our daily lives, requires flexibility, adaptability, and an openness to change. It is through these qualities that we find true success, not in our ability to control, but in our willingness to evolve. Nicholas I's story, while tragic, offers us a powerful reminder that those who refuse to adapt will be left behind, while those who embrace change will find a way to thrive. As we reflect on the life of Nicholas I, we are left with more than just the historical impact of his reign. We are confronted with the deeply personal lessons that resonate across time and space. His story is not just a tale of a ruler's mistakes. It is a mirror that reflects our own struggles with power, control, and the inevitability of change. What Nicholas I failed to recognize was that leadership, whether on a grand historical scale or within our own daily lives, is not defined by the power one holds, but by how one navigates the turbulent currents of time, how one adapts and evolves to meet the challenges that come with it. Nicholas I's downfall was not due to an isolated failure, but a culmination of his inability to embrace the very essence of leadership. Flexibility. His refusal to listen to the voices of the people, to engage with the changing world, and to acknowledge the needs of a society moving away from autocracy ultimately became the weight that dragged down the empire he sought to protect. His reign serves as a stark reminder that power, when held too tightly, becomes a prison not only for the people, but also for the leader. The inability to let go of outdated systems and beliefs can create an insurmountable gap between what is and what needs to be. This lesson hits close to home for all of us. Whether we are leading an organization, navigating relationships, or striving for personal growth, we too face the challenge of holding on to the old ways. It is easy to become comfortable in the familiar, to resist change because it feels uncertain or even threatening. But Nicholas I's story teaches us that this resistance to change, whether in leadership or in our own lives, creates a rift between who we are and who we need to be. His inflexibility led to the disintegration of an empire, a fall that could have been avoided if he had been open to reform and willing to listen. There is also a deeply human element in Nicholas I's story, one that highlights the internal struggle between duty and personal growth. He believed, deeply and fervently, that his actions were in service of Russia's best interests. His desire to protect the empire, to maintain its stability, was not rooted in selfish ambition, but in a sense of responsibility and love for his country. Yet, his unwillingness to allow for change, his refusal to trust the people and to embrace the changing world, made his actions counterproductive. This tragic contradiction, the desire to protect and preserve by holding on to control, echoes in our own struggles. How many times have we clung to old ways of thinking, believing that they were protecting us, only to find that it was this very attachment that was causing our downfall? The deeper lesson here is that leadership, whether at the level of an empire or within our personal lives, requires humility. It requires the courage to let go of what we think we know, to trust in the ability of others, and to recognize that the world is always changing. The leadership that Nicholas I provided, though characterized by strength and unwavering determination, lacked the humility necessary for true greatness. He failed to recognize that the strength of a leader lies not in their ability to dominate, but in their ability to serve, to adapt, and to grow with the needs of the people. This brings us to the emotional core of Nicholas I's story. His inability to adapt and engage with the shifting landscape of Europe and the growing discontent of his people was not just a political failure, it was a personal tragedy. It speaks to the deep human fear of letting go, of relinquishing control, and of the vulnerability that comes with embracing change. There is an emotional resonance in his story because we can all relate to that fear, whether it's the fear of change in our personal lives, the fear of failure, or the fear of losing control over something we care deeply about. But Nicholas I's story shows us that it is precisely this fear that can blind us to the opportunities that change brings. In our own lives, we often face moments where we must choose. Do we continue to cling to the familiar, to the comfortable, even when it no longer serves us? Or do we embrace the discomfort of change, trusting that it will lead to growth? NicholasI chose the former, and it cost him dearly. But his story also gives us the opportunity to choose differently. We do not have to make the same mistakes he did. We can learn from his failure and, with the wisdom of hindsight, choose to listen, adapt, and evolve. True leadership, whether in politics or in personal life, is not about power. It's about the ability to evolve, to understand the needs of others, and to create a future that is better than the past. The collapse of Nicholas I's empire serves as a reminder that leadership requires more than just control and authority. It requires the ability to adapt, to listen, and to let go of what no longer serves. It is a lesson that is not only relevant to leaders of nations, but to each of us as individuals. We are all leaders in our own lives, and the choices we make to embrace change, to evolve, and to grow determine the future we create. Nicholas I's reign is a tragic reminder that change is not an enemy to be feared, but a force to be embraced. Those who resist it will ultimately be left behind. but those who embrace it will find new opportunities, new pathways, and new ways to lead. As we look back on the lessons of his reign, let us be reminded that the greatest strength lies not in holding on to power, but in letting go and embracing the future. Only then can we ensure that we will not fall into the same trap of rigidity and inflexibility. Only then can we create a future that is not just secure, but full of possibility.